And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth. So the whole financial side of our lives. And I don't know why my computer is dinging. I thought I closed my email, but in fact, I did not. There you go. Okay. So here we are in 2026, and I don't know about you. I did not expect the year to ramp up so quickly, I guess is the best way to put it. It's been a busy 14 days, 2 weeks, I guess, that the year has been going on here. But it's as they say, it's better than the alternative. So I don't know how much you follow other areas of the business, press and podcast world, but there is certainly from time to time, it seems like with increasingly frequently stories about employees ghosting their employers. This was a term I did not know for quite a long time. I didn't know that it meant what we used to call blowing somebody off, but in any event, the idea of ghosting an employer, wow. I mean, like not showing up, still collecting a paycheck until the employer, I guess, finally fires you for not showing up. That's really not anything in my experience, I will admit. But evidently this is something that goes on these days. And, thinking about that, while presumably the people doing this are not doing work that's crucial to a business, because presumably they would be missed very quickly. If the vice president of marketing doesn't show up for a while, presumably somebody notices after, let's say a day or two, and gives them a call and what's up, kind of thing. But it's definitely an issue. And what do you do about such things now? That they don't show up. Okay. Again, eventually you're going to figure that out. But what do you do about people who show up, but don't really do what they're supposed to be doing? To me, that's really a bigger problem, because and I know people who have done this. They've told me about it. I won't mention any names. I don't want to dime anybody out. But the idea of sort of mailing it in, as we used to say. Again, if you're in a big, huge company, maybe people can get away with that. There certainly were people who got away with that when I was in the Navy, and the Navy is so huge. There's so many people, and while in one way most units, or at least a lot of units, are understaffed, in other ways, the ethos of the Navy, and this is true of the Marine Corps as well, with which I also work very closely. The mission still has to be met. So if somebody is dropping their pack, other people are going to pick it up and see that it gets done. And then when it comes time for annual fitness reports, hopefully that all gets sorted out, and eventually that person is sort of shunted to the side. And, depending on what level they're at, they get a reputation for not being diligent in helping meet the mission. And so, they don't get promoted and out they go. But, in a small business, to have an employee, or worse, a partner, not taking an active and, reasonably enthusiastic role in what's going on is extremely problematic. And it can cost a business dearly it could, in an extreme situation, even cause the business to fail. Now, hopefully, the other people involved would, be watching what's going on and wouldn't let it get to that point. But in a fast-paced, um, fairly high pressure work environment, sometimes people get so focused on what they're doing, they don't realize what's happening around them. And it's not until what's happening affects, their portion that they realize, oh, hey, something's wrong here. And if the person in charge of the enterprise, the owner, the CEO, the president, whatever that person's title is, isn't paying careful attention, these can become huge, huge problems. So I decided I wanted to share a few thoughts on this phenomenon of zombie employees and co-owners or partners. What did I call this? Dealing with zombie, employees and or partners. So because I think we need to be on the watch for it if something is not working at our businesses. And by the same token, I think, those of us who are employees, or if you're an employee, I guess I'm an employee of my own company, but if you're employed by somebody else and you feel yourself slipping into this role, maybe it's time for some evaluation of, do I really want to be doing this? Do I need to be thinking about going somewhere else, working for another company? Why do I feel so unmotivated about my work? Is that having, or what kind of impact is that having on the other areas of my life? Is this just a sign of a general malaise? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these kinds of issues usually don't happen they're usually not just relegated to our professional lives. They often connect to other parts of our lives. And so they're a sign that we need to take a step back and think about, what's going on and why and what we need to do about it. So, as far as I know, there's no technical definition for, what a zombie employee or partner is, but it's basically somebody who's, still on the payroll, still an owner of an organization, of a company, who is no longer meaningfully contributing to the enterprise, right? And by the way, this could be a nonprofit as well. It doesn't have to be a for-profit company. So we think of working with or for a nonprofit as being more motivating than working for a for-profit company. That certainly has not been my experience. And there are times when it can be very demotivating working for a nonprofit, despite it supposedly having a defined mission and a cause it's pursuing and all of that. And sometimes it's coming because the organization has lost its direction and people feel like I'm no longer involved in what it was I thought I would be doing for, as someone working for or even volunteering for a nonprofit. And by the way, I'm talking in the context of paid employment or partners, co-owners. But if you're running a nonprofit and you start to see this kind of malaise among your volunteers, that's a problem as well. Now, if it's one volunteer, it could be something related to that individual, but these things have a way of spreading. And so even if we're dealing with, so-called, volunteer employees, for want of a better way of describing them, if I'm leading a nonprofit, I'm going to, and I see somebody who's disengaging, I want to talk to that person. Why is this happening? Why do you feel this way? Because it could be something I'm doing as the leader of the organization. It could be some conflict. There could be another even volunteer or employee who is turning off other people. So we want to get to the root cause of people disengaging, whether we're paying them or not. So how do people come to this? I think is an important question. And I think oftentimes what happens is there's something difficult that the person needs to deal with, and they, instead of dealing with it, they avoid it. Now, it could be that the focus of their job is changing. It could be that the people with whom they work has changed. They don't like the new people. It could be any number of reasons, but um, because of these difficulties, their performance starts to decline. And rather than dealing with the issue up front, going to, let's say the problem stems from maybe there's some new members who have been added to the team, and the person doesn't get along with those new members. Maybe they feel like they're not being accorded proper respect. As someone who's been on the team longer, knows more about what's going on, new people come in. Oftentimes they're very excited. I had this happen in the Navy, by the way, when I was sent to Germany to deal with the Warrior Transition Program. And I was very excited about being a part of helping my fellow sailors and officers go through a transition when they were coming out of South Asia or Africa, getting them ready to go back and reunite with their families. It was something I knew a lot about. I'd been very involved with it for several years. And so I was excited about having the opportunity to do this and live in Europe. Didn't want to be away from my family, but, in talking to my then wife about it, I was very excited. And unbeknownst to me, the chaplain who was back at headquarters in the United States was furious that I was so excited about doing this and had all these ideas that I wanted to bring to the program. And he basically sought to undermine me as quickly and as effectively as he could. And he was pretty successful at it, as a matter of fact. And from my perspective, I was completely demotivated because I had gone there, committed to be away from my family for a year to help, my shipmates out. And here my nominal supervisor is completely undercutting me. And it was impossible. In this case, I tried to speak to him about it. He didn't want to hear it. As far as he was concerned, he was sorry he had ever met me. That's actually what he said to me. Like, great leadership right there, right? And by the way, he said it he screamed it at me in a public place. So, oftentimes though, the problem is the person who's becoming the zombie does not want to talk about it. They avoid what they think may be, a controversy. And so instead of dealing with the issue that's causing them to feel demotivated, they just avoid it, and they back off. And they kind of oftentimes they count on prior success, prior productivity to shield them from the perception that they've somehow partially or even completely disengaged from from the activity of the business, of the organization, and that's how they're able to sort of coast along. And so this is why it's important that leaders of a business pretty routinely engage with employees at all levels, just to see what's going on, try and get kind of early warning signs of problems. All of these are critical to making sure that the organization remains vital, and that employees and partners remain connected and enthusiastic about the enterprise. So, especially with co-owners, I think co-owners need to meet on a regular basis. They need to be talking about these issues on a regular basis. Okay, so there of course is a hidden cost to this, a hidden cost to zombie employees and partners, and that is that the business is paying them for a certain amount of work, or a certain amount of productivity, however you would describe that, and it's not getting that. And so then they become a drag, a financial drag on the business. But that's not necessarily even the worst part. Maybe the business is prosperous enough that it can carry a little bit of sort of dead weight, but it is the almost power of these people to infect others that really is the hidden cost to a business. And especially if that person is a co-owner or a partner, or someone in a very senior leadership role, even if they're not actually an equity stakeholder. So when other people in the organization get a kind of a drift of what's going on, or they feel like somebody else's work is getting sort of pushed off on them, and the other person is not carrying their full weight, well, so then that will demotivate that person. Now, look, there are times when people have personal issues, they have struggles, whatever it is, and an individual employee may not be able to be as productive as they typically are. That's not the issue. Okay, for someone in that position, and hopefully they can go to their team leader and say, hey, I need you to know what's going on with me. I've got some problems at home, or God forbid, my child is sick. It's really kind of tearing my guts out, something like that. And say, is there a way I can get a little bit of relief from the stress, the pressure, the demands of my job? I need to be able to put more of my attention on personal things. An employee who says that, I think in general should be accommodated. But the people who are going to pick up the slack should be asked affirmatively, look, Bob is, he's got some things going on, and I need to take some of the work off his plate. I'd really appreciate it if you would take some of this on, kind of for the good of the team. And look, hopefully this won't happen, but God forbid this happens to you. Hopefully you would know that the rest of the team would kind of stand with you through this and cut you some slack, and that's the kind of work environment I'm as the team leader I'm trying to create, right? So that's not a zombie. That's someone who's affirmatively dealing with what's going on. The zombie is the person who's trying to hide it, or just doesn't care enough about what's going on to address the issue. And so that causes the kind of resentment that is so corrosive to an organization. Going back to that example that I used earlier, when I was in the Navy, the program was called the Warrior Transition Program. We were stationed at a army base in Sembach, Germany. And I have to tell you that the it wasn't just the way I was treated. It was how things were run in general, especially after the officer in charge turned over. So the new guy who came in was kind of a pet of the commanding officer of the parent unit, and he had no leadership ability at all. And people just disengaged. It was one of the worst professional experiences of my life. And the assistant officer in charge and I, we tried to get headquarters to understand what was going on, and they just didn't want to hear it because we were outsiders. The insider was the officer in charge, and they didn't want to believe what we were saying. And the more junior people were afraid of retribution because the commanding officer of the parent unit back in the States was known for doing that. And indeed, in the end, he clobbered the assistant officer in charge and me. That's what happened. And the problems were allowed to fester, right? I bring up this example for two reasons. One is the sailors coming there as a transition, as a way stop, were not being well served and well taken care of. That's number one. And number two, millions and millions of dollars a year were being spent on this program. It was held up as sort of this jewel of the naval reserves, and we would have admirals come to see it, and I think we even had a congressman come and see it or whatever. I think they just wanted a trip to Germany, but whatever. And it was a complete farce when all was said and done, because the only motivation for having the program was to have the program so that the high-ranked people could come and visit it. But it was not at all doing what it was supposed to be doing. And in fact, well, anyway, my point is that it was no wonder that we had so many zombies in that unit, because our mission was not being met. And then on top of that, we're away from our families. Yes, we're in Germany. Germany was a great place, but it wasn't like we were free to travel in whenever we wanted. We worked 5.5 to 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, running this program. So, and that's another issue. People were coming there thinking, hey, I'm gonna have a European vacation on the Navy's dime, right? No, that's not the way it works. And so they had been improperly prepared to come there. And so when they got there and realized what the demands were, they did not engage. And so we had, again, a unit of zombies. Very, very unfortunate for all concerned. Okay, let's take a break and we'll be back for more. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So, okay, what are the warning signs that you have a zombie employee or partner, right? So the first is decision avoidance, especially if it's a partner or a co-owner. So if the practice has been that just, especially big decisions were made kind of jointly and the person won't engage, that's your first clue right there. But even among more rank and file employees, there's decisions made at every level. And the reluctance to make decisions is a sign that something is amiss. So is procrastination, just chronic delay of completing tasks, of whatever it is that needs to get done. Right now, the chronic delay all by itself won't necessarily mean that you've got a zombie on your hands. It could be that the person is not responsible for the delay. So, person who's like beating your desk down saying, look, I've got this deadline to meet, but I need, George and Sue to do X and Y, and I can't get George and Sue to do X and Y, so I can't meet the deadline, right? Okay, so that person isn't the zombie, but maybe George and or Sue are the zombies, right? So, but if there's a chronic delay or procrastination, the source of that needs to be found, because that may very well be where the problem lies. And then finally, this sort of like checkbox participation. So, person comes in, goes through the motions, but nothing particularly productive is happening. Then you can see this among salespeople. So, they come in, they sit at their desk, maybe they make a couple of calls, but they're not really producing any sales. Well, again, that's a problem. Now, if they're a commission salesperson, may not be as big a deal, because if they're not producing, they're not getting paid. But if it's a salesperson who's on a salary plus, override or whatever, so now you're paying somebody who's responsible for, bringing in the bacon, and they're not, and now you don't have revenue to run the company. So those are some of them. And then another sign, and again, this is especially true among co-owners, partners, is if they start expressing strong opinions, after the fact. So a decision has been made, they couldn't be bothered to participate in the making of the decision, but now that the decision has been made, they are criticizing it. This is a sign of a disengaged or a zombie partner. And this may be the kind of passive aggressive way that they've chosen to handle the situation. Now, I should add, by the way, that people aren't always aware that they're turning into a zombie. Okay, if you watch zombie movies, right, that person's not always aware. But the same is true here in real life. So, you may have a partner. And of late, they seem to always criticize. They defer to you to make the decision, and then turn around and criticize you for the decisions you've made. So that at that point, I think you need to sit down with that person and say, hey, what's going on here, right? We didn't used to be like this. Okay, all right. So another issue that arises then is sometimes leaders will rationalize to keep the zombies. So, if it's a particularly well-liked person, okay, or kind of the pet of the office, so to speak, they may be reluctant to get rid of the person, or the person may be just very, very popular with the other employees, and so the team leader doesn't want to be the bad guy getting rid of this employee that everybody else likes. So so they'll rationalize keeping the person. Another issue may be they may be afraid of litigation. I don't want to fire an employee. It's not that I can identify anything specifically that they've done wrong. It's just they're not being productive, and I don't want to get into a legal fight. That can be a problem. It can also be personal conflict. So the zombie, just because the person is a zombie doesn't mean that they're not aggressive. Again, look at zombie movies, right? They'll eat all kinds of stuff, but if the team leader is in conflict with the person, they could be afraid of becoming part of a volatile incident, and so rather than deal with all of that sort of pain and suffering, they just sort of they'll snap out of it. It'll be fine, blah 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 blah, rather than dealing with the conflict or dealing with getting rid of the person and now having to find somebody else, right? There's a lot of work in there. So you have somewhat of the sort of sunk cost fallacy in this. So, we've already invested so much in this person to, fire the person now. Oh, we're going to lose all that investment and then we're going to have to find another person and invest in them. Well, that may be the case, but this is why it's called the sunk cost fallacy. If a person has become a zombie or is headed to zombiedom, right, and can't be turned around in terms of their performance, so it's not going to get better as time goes by. And as I've mentioned already a couple of times, that disease will start affecting other employees, and now you've got a whole zombie universe there in your organization. And so you just the reality is we can't get hung up on what we've invested in this person. If they're not going to perform at the level at which the person needs to perform, they'll have to be let go. There's a short-term cost to that, but long-term, it'll be almost for sure better for the business, both financially, but also in terms of the culture of the organization. So there are some key differences between a zombie employee and a zombie partner. So, employees can be managed, they can be managed out. In the end, they can be fired. They're an employee, okay? And as long as the proper procedures are followed for, the law in your state and federal law, whatever, in the end, an employee can be fired and somebody new hired, or you can promote somebody from within, and that can solve the problem. So if the zombie is a partner, that requires structural solutions. That person, in most cases, cannot be fired. Rarely do partnership arrangements allow for such things. Now, oftentimes, partnership arrangements are rather ad hoc. There's not a written partnership agreement, or if it's an LLC, sometimes an LLC is supposed to have an operating agreement, but sometimes they don't. And so then on exactly what terms can that person be asked to leave the business, forced out of the business? It may not be clear at all. And in an event like that, the prospect of litigation is real, right? So, the first issue in dealing with a zombie partner is to make sure that when a partnership is formed, and I'm using the term partnership now fairly loosely, whether it's an actual partnership as its legal entity, or whether it's an LLC or a corporation, right? There should be a clear written agreement that will deal with these kinds of issues. Maybe there's some sort of buy-sell agreement. However you're going to work it. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you how these things are constructed legally. What I can tell you is you should sit down with a lawyer and have a written agreement put together, and a lawyer who's experienced in dealing with the kinds of issues that come up between the co-owners of a business, right? Because if a co-owner, if the only remedy appears to be that that owner has to leave, so what are you going to do about equity in the business? What are you going to do about continuity in the business? All of those become crucial, and they can quite literally cause the business to fail if they're not dealt with effectively. Okay, so if you have a proper agreement, so then you can act in accordance with the terms of that agreement. But if there is no agreement, now there's an even worse problem, because there's no clear path to resolving the situation with a zombie partner. There's probably going to have to be some very difficult discussions. Maybe a mediator needs to be brought in to help facilitate those discussions, or maybe you sit down with your lawyer, or if you've got a board of directors, maybe sit down with the chairman of the board of directors or something like that, someone who can help work through these issues. Okay, but it is much harder to deal with a zombie co-owner than it is to deal with a zombie employee. There's no doubt about that. So, what are some practical options for addressing this problem? Well, one is, and I'll deal with the employee side first. One is to have clear expectations of employees. Okay, so they should know what is required of them in their job. Okay, and there should be performance reviews. There should be consequences for subpar performance, just like there should be rewards for above par performance, right? All of that needs to be worked out really at the time a person is employed. Okay, so again, it's much better off to come to an agreement on these issues at the start of a relationship than it is to try and figure them out ad hoc now that the relationship has been established and is ongoing. Okay, so does it need to be in writing? Well, that's usually best, right? And look, just because it's in writing doesn't mean it's immutable. So it can be changed. Maybe every 6 months you sit down with that person, you kind of go, you as the team leader sit down with that person and you go over it together. You make whatever modifications need to be made. Okay. And again, we're not talking about a situation where someone has something else going on in their life that's distracting them from work. That may very well be, it may distract them from their work, but that may be perfectly acceptable in the context. And if the person is being responsible in identifying to the team leader what's going on, okay, so maybe they're not meeting, the expectations as outlined, in the written agreement, but it's understood that, there's something going on here that, the employee needs to deal with, and that's understood by the company, and they're going to give the employee the space and the time to work that out. Okay, so those can always be done, and I think they should be done, right? Especially if you've got a good employee, right? We can't expect people's personal lives never to interfere with their professional lives. Okay, this is not 60 years ago where that was largely the expectation. And I'm not even sure. No, let me rephrase that. I don't think that was a good policy to force people to so bifurcate their lives. It is an unrealistic expectation. We need to be holistic human beings, and those of us who are employers, team leaders, whatever we call ourselves, we need to be mindful of that. Okay. So start out by the best way to avoid, well, not avoid, but the best way to prepare, God forbid, that there are zombie employees in our organizations, is to set clear expectations and then have periodic opportunities to review them. And they shouldn't be kind of check in the box opportunities, because then people will learn that they really don't have any meaning. They'll essentially ignore them. No, they should be substantive. They should be, even if you're doing written performance reviews. I know, again, going back to my Navy days. So I got a written performance review, what was called a fitness report or fit rep, every year. And I was asked to give input to it. And then, it was drafted, and in the end, the commanding officer was responsible for whatever it said and for signing it. And then, each year, I would go and meet with my commanding officer, and we would discuss, his findings. And now, fortunately for me, I always got outstanding, fitness reports until that, one unit. And so, I never had to have, an uncomfortable meeting with a commanding officer until that last one. And I already knew that that was going to be bad. I knew he disliked me. And so fine, whatever. But interestingly enough, sometimes issues did arise because as a chaplain, kind of the eyes and ears of morale and well-being in the command, I would take those opportunities to kind of give a fitness report to my CO, so he knew what was going on and where I thought there was room for improvement. And I think that a good by the way, a good commanding officer was always happy to hear that input. Okay. I was able to tell a bad commanding officer because I would say something like that and they would say, well, I haven't heard about that. It's like, well, sir, that's why I'm bringing it to your attention, because I assumed not. Right. A good commanding officer would say, oh, well, this is important, chaplain. Tell me more about what you're seeing going on, and give me your thoughts for addressing it. And that's how in the civilian world we should be as well. So if we're doing a debrief, if you will, that's what we called it in the Navy, on someone's performance, we should be open to hear what they have to say about what's going on as well. And rather than poo-pooing it or insisting that the person is misperceiving it, just let them speak their minds. Okay, maybe they are misperceiving the situation. Okay, maybe everybody else thinks differently than this person does. That doesn't make them wrong. Okay, and they could be giving us important information, especially if they're the zombie and we finally get them talking. Okay, they could be giving us very important information that can really help us improve the organizational culture, right? So we need to, be clear about our performance expectations and make sure that we're having kind of an ongoing discussion. I don't literally mean ongoing, but maybe a regular discussion, a periodic discussion about it. Okay. Now, another option for addressing a zombie is to look at, maybe you need to redesign the role for a particular employee, or for that matter, for a partner. Okay, maybe they're doing something that it turns out they're not good at doing. Okay, but maybe they'd be better in this other role. So I'm not going to say the people, because I don't like that, but I know of an organization where they basically, the organization has created a quasi zombie employee. And the real problem, as I keep telling this person, is you need to be the one running the organization, right? You have the clearest vision and you have the loyalty and respect of everybody. And the current CEO does not. It's just, he just doesn't. I know him. He's a very nice guy, very sharp in his way, but he doesn't have the skills to run the organization. And that's just the reality of it. And he's partly, if not largely, responsible for creating the zombie that I've been talking to. So these are the kinds of things, redesigning roles can be very good. If it's a co-owner, maybe we need to just restructure the equity of the company and then negotiate an exit for the person or something like that, right? If there is no agreement, so then that is inevitably what's going to have to happen, unless you want to get into litigation. Okay, and finally, what do strong businesses that don't have zombies, or that rarely have zombies, what do they do differently? Well, the first thing they do is they stay aware of the state of their team members, of their employees, of leadership from top to bottom, right? They're engaged. And this is the hardest part of running a business, is staying engaged with your people in these days where there's less remote work going on now, certainly, than a couple of years ago, but where there's still a lot of remote work going on, and it's become for many companies just the way things are going to be. It's much easier to become detached from what's going on with your coworkers, and so periodic opportunities for people to meet in person for enough time that especially leadership can get a sense of how people are doing. Those need to happen. Okay, it's Zoom is just, well, I don't mean to blame Zoom. Virtual meetings, it's much more difficult to do that. So you're not picking up on the sense of people when we're meeting virtually. So I think that's a critical aspect of it, and that is a leadership aspect. Okay, it's unlikely that if an organization has a zombie, that leadership isn't at least partly responsible for the creation of that zombie. Okay, that's just the bottom line. What else can be done? Well, work to build systems where contributions, not just length of service or history of past accomplishment, are what's rewarded, but real contributions, real engagement in what's going on is important. And they can't be these sort of gold star, employee of the month, employee of the quarter kind of things that oftentimes go on. No, I'm unconvinced that those have any real impact. And by the way, they don't even have to be rewarded in the sense of, a bonus or whatever. Rewarded in the sense that people are recognized. So I know with people on the various teams that I create for my primary business, administrating probates and trusts, I look for opportunities where I see a team member or team members really engaged in dealing with especially a tough problem, and I let them know proactively how much I appreciate them being so engaged, and I let other members of the team know that as well. So there's nothing like that, saying thank you, a sincere thank you to people who are engaged, to motivate people to stay engaged. Okay, it's the flip side. We want to be aware of people who are disengaging, and I'm trying to think, not confront them, but engage with them to see what's going on. But we don't want to be so obsessed with potential zombies that we forget the people who are truly engaged and really seeking to meet the goals of the organization. We want to be equal. We want to recognize those people as well, right? And again, this is what makes it so tough to lead an organization. It can be exhausting at times, but that's what we're here to do. Okay, so potentially very, very difficult situation dealing with zombie employees, dealing with zombie co-owners, and avoiding it does not make it better. Okay, that's the main thing I will tell you. Avoiding it does not make it better. You need to stay engaged, need to stay on top of it. Even if in the beginning maybe you don't deal with it as well as you think you should have, or as well as you might have, doesn't matter. Be engaged. Let people know you're sincerely concerned about what's going on with them, and work the situation from there. So I thank you very much for joining me today, and especially my live viewers. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. I want to double check this. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I was pretty sure. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place. So I hope you'll join me for a cocktail and a schmooze. And then I'll be back next week for the full slate of the Way to Wow shows. So if you have any comments, criticisms, questions, links to the social media will be in the show notes after this episode posts on YouTube. So feel free to reach out. My email address is there as well. And let's see, I haven't asked this in a while. It's a new year. If you know someone who you think might be interested in this discussion, or other ones like it, or might benefit from it, maybe you know a zombie, right? And they don't realize they are. Send them a link to this episode. Suggest that they take a look at it. I'd be very. I would love to have the opportunity to help them, and even perhaps gain them as a subscriber, as I would to gain you as a subscriber if you're not already. So I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do, Marie Darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.